A sticking point in the discussions with Havana that have now led to us after 2023, 3 years of negotiating to 2026, no longer able to keep them in the same way?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to make a distinction between a technical agreement and the desire to have the Cubans here and the value that they have played in terms of our health system for Jamaicans over those many years. We value their contribution, we value the friendship, and we would certainly like to see it continue. The sticking point is really an issue of the terms of the agreement. And the initial agreement was expired some years ago, as you have said in your preface run-up. We have been trying to discuss to agree on a new set of terms, and we were unable to. And that is what led to a decision to not pursue any longer after a few years another MOU and rather give an opportunity in recognition of the excellent contribution of the Cubans to individual contracts if they so desire. Now, it really is up to the Cubans.
Hey guys, welcome back to Carib 21 Network, wherever in the world you're watching us from. So for the entire week, I've been talking about this, the Cuban medical program coming to an end in Jamaica, and it's been pretty much a controversial topic for the entire week. And from what I'm seeing coming out of Jamaica is that, in my opinion, I believe that the People's National Party is using this Cuban medical program. And in my opinion, I feel like the People's National Party is trying to align with the Cuban government to sabotage Jamaica. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. I have a lot of information coming out of this program and some new information that is not out there. And based on what we have seen, the reaction that we have seen so far from the People's National Party, the opposition party, from different members of the People's National Party, Mr. Fitzjackson, Mr. Alfred Dawes, coming out and bashing the government. And just keep this in mind, this Cuban medical program is not only coming to an end in Jamaica, it is coming to an end right across the Caribbean. And this is not coming to an end in terms of Jamaica, the medical program in Jamaica. The government is not putting a stop to it. The government is trying to sign a new contract because the contract that's in existence now has been up since 2023. And the Jamaican government is trying to sign a new contract that is in keeping with international laws. And as a Jamaican and as someone that is friends with a lot of Jamaicans in the medical field, I know Jamaicans, nurses, doctors that work in Bermuda, that work in Antigua, Barbuda, Canada, America, the United Kingdom, the United Arab Emirates. I know a lot of Jamaican in the health sector. And that is one of the reasons why Jamaica is short of medical practitioners, because a lot of Jamaicans go where the money is and they go overseas. Jamaican nurses are in high demand everywhere in the world that nurses go to make more money. You'll find Jamaican nurses. So I believe that the opposition party is using this, and based on information that I'm getting, I believe that this is an attempt to sabotage the government of Jamaica just to score political mileage. So that is what I'm going to be doing tonight. I'm going to bring some evidence. As Spice said, I'm going to bring the receipts of why, when you see the People's National Party, the opposition, whether on health, Dr. Dawes or Fitzjackson security, or whoever coming out and talking against the government as if they care about the people in Jamaica who are not going to be able to benefit from this Cuba eye care program anymore, as if that is their main priority. But based on everything that they're saying, based on all the facts, all the information out there, they are more interested in gaining political points from this disaster. So that is what I want to talk about today. And as I said, I'm going to break it down clear that everybody can understand what is going on. The Cuban doctors, which a lot of fake information out there so far is that the Cuban doctors are gone. No, the Cuban doctors and nurses, they're still in Jamaica until I think the last day is the 28th of this month is their last day in Jamaica. The Jamaican government is not the one that is removing them. The Cuban government is the one that's removing them. So those are just some correction that I'd like to put out there, because people are online talking as if the Jamaican government is expelling the Cuban doctors and nurses. No, they cannot get to an agreement that would bring Jamaica up to international labor law as it pertains to the Cuban doctor. And the Jamaican government say they will not sign a new long-term contract under the same agreement. The Cuban government refused and decide to pull their medical practitioners. So that is really what is going on.
In the discussions with Havana that have now led to us after 2023, 3 years of negotiating to 2026, no longer able to keep them in the same way?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to make a distinction between a technical agreement and the desire to have the Cubans here and the value that they have played in terms of our health system for Jamaicans over those many years. We value their contribution, we value the friendship, and we would certainly like to see it continue. The sticking point is really an issue of the terms of the agreement. And the initial agreement will expire some years ago, as you have said in your preface run-up. We have been trying to discuss to agree on a new set of terms, and we were unable to. And that is what led to a decision to not pursue any longer after a few years another MOU. And rather give an opportunity in recognition of the excellent contribution of the Cubans to individual contracts if they so desire. Now, it really is up to the Cubans to make a decision. Just as we have our sovereign right to make an offer, they have their sovereign right to refuse or to accept the offer. And of course, the soundings up to this point is suggesting that they may have an issue. So, I'm hoping that the conversation is not a signal of any souring of the friendship, or certainly a recognition of the contribution of the program over time. And I certainly hope that we can find a way to make it work. In the meantime, of course, we have a responsibility to the people of Jamaica. I have a responsibility as Minister of Health to deal with the health systems. And we just have to develop some contingencies while we hopefully try to work this out.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs yesterday in its statement had indicated that we were now going to be reaching out to these doctors individually, the 277 that Cuba has now said are on the ground here. Has the Cuban government officially consented to their citizens being hired individually, or do they view this as a breach of their sovereign control over their medical personnel, especially after the statement today saying they're bringing them all back home?
Well, clearly, the statement is self-evident that there is disapproval of the approach that we have pursued or have been intending to pursue. And again, that's their right. I mean, it's the right of the government to determine. It's the right of the Cubans who are here to determine. So this is not about forcing anyone to do anything. It really is an attempt at trying to find accommodation. It's part of the negotiations. And it's part of the offer that we have placed on the table. So I think it's important to respect the rights of Cuba and Cubans to determine what they want. And I hope that, if what they want is returned, and if the Cubans here want to go back, we should allow them free, safe, and comfortable passage while we try to work out the challenges that we face.
We heard as well from the Minister of Foreign Affairs today that there was no pressure from the U.S. On this. However, Cuba in its statement says that that's not accurate. And the 2025 U.S. Trafficking in Persons report for Jamaica explicitly listed hiring Cuban workers directly as something that they called a prioritized recommendation to avoid a tier 2 downgrade. Is it then appropriate for us to say that there was no influence? Because remarkably, we were doing yesterday exactly what it is that the U.S. said we were supposed to do in order to not be downgraded and have visa restrictions and the like.
Well, pressure is a technical term that one could interpret in different ways. I mean, the U.S. certainly has a right, as does Cuba and Jamaica, to express itself on what it sees as an issue. We live in a global community. The geopolitical considerations change from decade to decade. It's a very sensitive time now. And we have to listen to all concerned as we seek to protect the rights and the interests of our people. We have our own laws. Those laws should guide how we act. So, if I were to identify all the parameters, all the factors, I'd be prepared to say that you can't ignore the geopolitical considerations, but you also have to reconcile that with your own sovereignty, self-determination, how you integrate yourselves in the hemisphere, in the markets, how do you achieve the best protection for your people, and how you're viewed in the international community. So some of the renegotiation would have factored some of those considerations. And I don't know if it is pressure per se, or it is just a pragmatic, practical approach to achieving what you're seeking to achieve.
Yes, so that was Dr. Christopher Tufton. So the problem that I've been having all week is that I've been seeing members of the People's National Party popping up all over the place and coming down hard on the government, saying that the government they're cowering to the Trump administration, and that is why they're pulling this program. And just imagine the People's National Party saying that a history that for those of us who are 50 years or in our 40s or whatever would have remembered what happened under the Michael Manley government when Jamaica was sanctioned, and it took Jamaica over 25 years to recover just from the Michael Manley and the America back and forth. And knowing the history of this irresponsible opposition in a global world that we're living in now that is much different from back in 1972. Remember, in 1972, the American government targeted Jamaica because of Michael Manley's relationship with Fidel Castro, the Cuban government. In 2026, Donald Trump, this Trump administration is targeting every single country in this world. We have seen Venezuela stop. Venezuela supplied Cuba with 65% of their oil. Cuba supplied Venezuela with hundreds of medical practitioners, nurses, doctors. Cuba supplied Venezuela with a lot of security. President Maduro entire security detail were not Venezuelan, they were Cubans. And the People's National Party leadership under the stewardship of Mark Golding is going to look at the Jamaican people and say that the government of the day in Jamaica should stand up to this Trump administration, even though Venezuela, Cuba's closest friend, had to cut relationship with them. Venezuela army is about the population of the entire Jamaica. Venezuela, when they were ready to go and fight, Maduro said they had over 2 million people that were ready to fight for Venezuela. And if Venezuela could not stand up to America, if Venezuela had to send back all their doctors and nurses to Cuba, stop sending oil to Cuba, why does Mark Golding believe that the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Dr. Andrew Holness, owe it to him? Because look, one of the misleading thing that I'm seeing going through the media also is about this long-lasting relationship between the Cuban government and Jamaica. That is fake news, false information. Jamaica and the Cuban people, we have always had a close relationship with the Cuban people. However, the Cuban government and the People's National Party are the one that have a long-lasting relationship. And for people who know about Jamaica history, political history, knows that Mr. Edward Seaga would not sit down today in 2026 and listen to anything that the People's National Party is saying about Cuba. Dr. Andrew Holness is being more diplomatic. When Seaga returned to office after Michael Manley in 1980, when Edward Seaga returned to office, when he went to office, he expelled a lot of Cuban diplomats, including medical practitioners from Jamaica. So this notion out there that the Cuban government and Jamaica government, we have this long-lasting, loving relationship. The relationship between the Cuban government and listen, I'm separating the Cuban people from the Cuban government. The relationship between the Cuban government and Jamaica stopped with the People's National Party. I urge anyone that's watching now, every single thing that's been signed in Jamaica, from the Cuban medical program to the schools that the Cuban government came to Jamaica and built, they came and did it as a favor to the People's National Party. So that is one thing that need to be corrected. And what people need to understand, let's use Barbados. Barbados, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Mottley, she is a comrade. Her party is the sister party to the People's National Party. Everyone from the People's National Party praise and adore Mia Mottley. And Mia Mottley is the most loved and most popular Prime Minister within the Caribbean. And even in Barbados, there's no Cuban nurses or doctors in Barbados. And Mia Mottley put out a statement last year. Let me play the statement and come back and talk about it. Let me just play the statement that Mia Mottley put out.
This matter with the Cubans and the nurses should tell us everything that we need to know. Barbados does not currently have Cuban medical staff or Cuban nurses, but I will be the first to go to the line and to tell you that we could not get through the pandemic without the Cuban nurses and the Cuban doctors. I will also be the first to tell you that we paid them the same thing that we paid Bajans, and that the notion, as was peddled not just by this government in the US, but the previous government, that we were involved in human trafficking by engaging with the Cuban nurses, was fully repudiated and rejected by us.
Okay, so that was the Honorable Mia Mottley. So I see a lot of People's National Party supporter, and I see like a lot of content creators that go out there and spread the propaganda for the People's National Party. They are using the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Mottley, as someone that, look, the Prime Minister of Barbados is standing up to the Trump administration, and Andrew Holness is a coward, and a woman is standing up to the Trump administration, but the Prime Minister of Jamaica can't stand up to the, to the Trump administration, and he's weak. And you just heard that from the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. There is not one single Cuban doctor or nurses in Barbados today. There are Jamaican nurses in Barbados. lots of Jamaican nurses in Barbados. There is not one Cuban nurse or doctor in Barbados. So when the Prime Minister of Barbados come and said she's willing to step to the front of the line and give up her visa, the Prime Minister of Barbados know that she don't have to give up anything because there's no Cuban doctor in Barbados right now. And the other islands that have Cuban doctors and nurses have already quietly give up their doctors and nurses, sent them back to Cuba. And there are some islands that were able to sign a deal with the Cuban government to keep their nurses and doctors in those islands. And I'm going to talk about those later and show you the hypocrisy of the People's National Party wanting the government to stand up to this Trump administration. When places like Canada, okay, for example, Canada, most of the tourists that goes to Cuba are Canadians. Cuba is the biggest market for tourism in Cuba is Canada. And Canada also sent oil and a lot of stuff to Cuba. And the Trump administration threatened Canada and said, look, if you send any oil there, we are going to put all this tariff on your country. Canada stopped. So Canada stopped. Mexico stopped. Venezuela stopped. All of these bigger countries stopped. But the People's National Party members are running up and down out there in Jamaica saying that the government is weak because the government is not standing up for Cuba. That is what this irresponsible opposition is doing. And I saw the worst thing. I think, like being around and observing politics for decades, as a youth that grew up in the 80s, when if you wear an orange or a green somewhere else, you could lose your life. The worst of politics. I've experienced the worst of politics. From Seaview Garden, Waterhouse, Augustown. I've been there, done that, seen the big guns and bullets flying all over the place. I've seen the worst. But what I witnessed this week with Fitz Jackson, that takes the cake. That has got to be the worst thing that I've ever seen. When a member of parliament can come out on national TV and say, I stand with the Cuban government, not the Cuban people. I stand with the Cuban government, a government that does not allow its people to vote, a government that has over 14,000 political prisoners, people that went out and protest are locked up in prison. And when a member of our political class can come out there on national media and say to Jamaicans, I stand with the Cuban government and I trust the Cuban government more than I trust the Jamaican government. I've never seen anything like that. And if that was in some other country, I think they would call it treason or something, and this man would have to leave politics. But in Jamaica, you can do anything and get away with it. So let me find the clip.
Need and they come to your assistance. Cuba has been that to us. The argument advanced by the Minister of Foreign Affairs as a basis of termination, unilateral termination, as the Cubans have said. And if you ask me, I believe the Cubans in this more than I believe my government. Regrettable, frivolous argument that the Minister of Finance advanced at the Standing Finance Committee and in subsequent news releases is again disgraceful. Payments are being made to the Cuban government for the workers on behalf of the workers who come here. To be frank, what is unique about that? None of these workers from China or elsewhere where it's paid by the government of Jamaica. They are paid by a private company on behalf of the workers. And there are a number of companies in Jamaica who do not pay their workers directly. They pay to the contracting party. In the case of the Cuban health service workers, the contracting arrangement is between the government of Jamaica and the government of Cuba.
Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State for the U.S., he came last year on a visit and he described this agreement as forced labor.
I have had the opportunity to interact with a number of Cuban health care workers. None of them are forced workers, forced labor. You know, if that argument is to have any credibility, why aren't they asking the Chinese workers to leave? On the basis of their own argument, it's frivolous and it's dishonest. It's dishonest. All I can say, better days will come. We are not losing hope in our country. And what we need to do, the opposition is steadfast. We will stand with the Cuban government on this matter. It's clear. It is responding to other demands, other instructions, rather than giving priority to the demands of our people.
When you say other instructions and other demands, you mean from the U.S.?
All the entities and governments have instructed them. And no doubt the U.S. government is one of them.
Yes, so this man, Mr. Fitzjackson, Jamaican politician, I trust the Cuban government over my own government. Let that sink in. I trust the Cuban government over my own government. And let's just keep this in mind. As I said, right now, currently, it's reported that there's roughly 14,000 political prisoners in prison in Cuba. The last set of people that got arrested 5 years ago for protesting because they wanted better in Cuba. And thousands of them were gathered up and were locked away. We saw them releasing 50 yesterday. And this is an opposition party, the People's National Party, that went to Heroes Circle and protest a few months before the election. We live in a country where the opposition party can go out there and protest against the government with other people without being arrested. But yet, a member of the opposition is going to come and say, I trust the Cuban government, who does not allow protests in Cuba, more than the Jamaican government, that any Jamaican can go out there and protest as much as they want. I have seen people on social media calling the Prime Minister's wife a harlot, a prostitute. You would never do that in Cuba. Never. That will never happen in Cuba. You're not even going to go into a jail cell if you call the president of Cuba's wife a prostitute. I guarantee you that 100%. But a member of government, because taxpayers is paying this man. This man is getting paid by our taxpayers' dollar. And this man is going to say, I trust the Cuban government over my own government in Jamaica. This man should be removed from politics. This Mr. Fitzjackson should be removed from politics. To say something like that, he should be removed. And just some information, because a lot of these politicians with their big degree and with this, political gaslighting that they do, talking about the Cuban doctors. Let's just put it this way. It's reported, and I have information from inside too. I know people that were part. I've a bunch of friends from Cuba. I know people that were part of that medical program. And when Mr. Fitzjackson stand in front of the media and say the Jamaican government pay the agency and that is normal, that is common practice, this man is standing right there like deliberately misleading Jamaican people. Yes, in a lot of different fields, whether hospitality, whether nursing, it happens in Canada, it happens in America, where you have a private nursing company where nurses that want to work part-time, they sign up with those companies because they don't want a regular job. So they have nursing agencies that the government pay the agencies and the agency pay the nurses. That is common across the world. What happened in Cuba is a state agency that the government of Jamaica pay the state agency, and the state agency pay the doctors and the nurses. And what this man failed to admit, the information is coming out. I would respect him more if he came out and said, look, I did not realize that when the Jamaican government pay the agency takes 80% of the money and only give the nurses and the doctors 20%. I would respect him if he said that. But no Jamaican would agree for anything like that. This is the same government that was on the back of Dr. Andrew Holness last year saying that the nurses in Jamaica are underpaid. And just imagine, just the hypocrisy of that. The nurses in Jamaica are underpaid, but the Cuban nurses come to Jamaica, receive the same pay that Jamaican nurses receive, but their government takes out 80% and give them 20%. And this man stand there and say, I stand with the Cuban government. And anybody that follows regional politics or geopolitics globally, when you go out there, the last speech that Dr. Andrew Holness did, and every speech that you can go out there and find with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, every speech you can go out there and find with most of the leaders in the Caribbean, they say, I stand with the people of Cuba. That is what most of them would say. We stand with the Cuban people, but Fitzjackson do not stand with the Cuban people. He stand with the Cuban government. And this man should be ashamed of himself, because the audacity to complain about Jamaican nurses not making enough and telling the Jamaican government that, look, you not pay the nurse them enough. And that is why the nurses are running off to America, to Canada, to England, to the United Arab Emirates. But still sit there and being satisfied with the Cuban nurses receiving the same paycheck that the Jamaican nurses receive, minus 80%, and their government get to take 80% and they keep 20%. That is a level of hypocrisy that I can't even find words to explain. So, and the thing about it is that when Dr. Andrew Holness went out the other day at CARICOM and spoke and came under every criticism from the US congressman, the People's National Party were silent. They did not say, like, some words of thing for the Prime Minister standing up for the Cuban people. They were quiet. But no, they stand with the Cuban government and not the Cuban people. You can't make that up.
We must address the situation in Cuba with clarity and courage. Cuba is our Caribbean neighbor. Its doctors and teachers have served across our region. Its people are part of our shared history. But today, the Cuban people face severe economic hardship, energy shortages, and growing humanitarian strain. Jamaica is sensitive to the struggles of the Cuban people. Humanitarian suffering serves no one. Apart from our fraternal care and solidarity with the Cuban people, it must be clear that a prolonged crisis in Cuba will not remain confined to Cuba.
Okay, so I see the comment from at Paycheck, and anything you hear me talking right here, I know exactly what I'm talking about. This is not second and third hand information. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And let me explain it. Because a lot of people are talking, but they don't know what is going on. The delegation of Cuban medical workers that are in Jamaica, they are the largest contingency in the Caribbean right now. Or normally they are the largest, because when you compare Barbados and other Caribbean islands, they don't use as much medical practitioners as Jamaica. The medical doctors and nurses, they travel to Jamaica to work. They are selected by their government to go to Jamaica to work. Along with the medical doctors and nurses, there's an agency that goes like a supervisor that travels with them. The government pays the government pays the government of Cuba, and the agent that is there will give them their different percentage, but the most common one I know is 80% is given to the government and 20% to the Cubans. And that is the money that they keep. So yes, they get money in Jamaica, but how would you feel as a Jamaican if you work 100% and your government take 80 and give you 20, or take 70 and give you 30? That is the point, and that is documented in the United States of America. I know people might hate Marco Rubio, but when Marco Rubio is talking those things, Marco Rubio is Cuban American who still have extensive family members in Cuba. I talk to Cuban people all the time, and this information to a lot of Cubans is not new information. This was new to me. I did not know until this information came out, and when I went and started talking to people, because I know that in Cuba, the government collects all the pay and then pay the people. Because when I go to Cuba, when you go to the hotel and you talk to hotel workers and stuff, they'll explain to you that the government collects their paycheck and give them a percentage out of it. So I know that. I just didn't realize that it traveled with them when they went to Jamaica. So that is what happened. And that is one of the things I blame the government for, to the need to come out with this information and make people know. Because I guarantee you that Jamaicans, we love the Cuban doctors. We appreciate them. They are the best doctors in the world, in my opinion. They are loving, caring doctors. They are very professional. And we love and respect them for what they do for us. But the thing is, they are being exploited. And there's no two way about that. And the Minister of Health alluded to it, that yes, the agency get the money, they pay the workers, but he did not tell you the percent. They pay the work, they pay the nurses and the doctors. And one of the things that I was told by someone that used to be a Cuban medical practitioner that traveled also, is that the reason why it is better for them when they go overseas is that the overtime, they get to keep 100% of the overtime. So whenever they work in Jamaica, they work 40 hours. The government of Cuba gets that money and pay them whatever they want to pay them. The overtime goes directly to them. So from that overtime, they can pocket some money and do whatever they want. So that is the saving grace for them. But I don't know any Jamaican that would be comfortable. And Jamaicans are all over the world working as doctors, hospitality workers. And I see, you can tell that it's like Dieted People's National Party supporter talking a bunch of nonsense, that the government pay for their education, their free education, so the government have a right to take out 70 or 80%. And I'm like, when you hear that type of garbage, you know that it's some dieted people that they don't care about anything else but their political party. Because nobody, no Jamaican should be upset, should be furious about that, because nobody travels out of the Caribbean for work like Jamaicans. And for people who say that, the Jamaican government is not doing that. The Jamaican government has special program where they pay 100% for doctors, specialty doctors in Jamaica. And the only thing that the Jamaican government asks these doctors to do is to stay in Jamaica. And I know some people that get full scholarship, they have to stay for like 7 years, and you cannot leave and go work outside of Jamaica. If you leave and go work outside of Jamaica, then you have to pay back the government everything that reimburse the government what it costs for your university. The Cuban doctors and nurses, they are giving up most of their paycheck until they are retired. It is not paying off a student loan. So that is the thing that people are not getting. And as I said, like I understand if someone from China or North Korea or Eritrea who have been used to this this type of system, this communist system, because there are people in Eritrea, they have a similar communist system, and the people are used to it because they don't know anything else. In North Korea, the same thing. They have countries that are used to it. If someone from one of those countries said they didn't have a problem with it, I can understand. But when a Jamaican who love with money, who when we go and work, we want with money right away, going to look at me and tell me, say, it is okay for you to go work 40 hours and your government to come and take 70 and 80% out of it. I'm not buying that garbage. And then it continues with the minister. Let me just finish the prime minister. The minister, the spokesperson, opposition spokesperson on health, Dr. Dawes, again, you know, they used to say it's better to shut your mouth and make people think say you're an idiot than open your mouth and make people know say you're an idiot. And I believe that there's a time and a place for everything. And if you are the opposition party that don't want to come out and defend the government, just shut your mouth. But you cannot come out and pick a side, pick a Cuban government over the Jamaican government, especially when the Cuban government is a one-party government that don't allow voting when you in Jamaica have the right to vote GLP, PNP, or any type of P you want to vote for. You cannot come out and say you support this government and then turn around and call Dr. Andrew Holness a dictator. How does that make sense? How it makes sense to call the Prime Minister of Jamaica a dictator and then turn around and you are supporting a government that don't give its people right to vote, that don't give its people right to protest, that lock you up if you do certain things. How does that make sense? So the opposition spokesperson on health, another crazy piece of work.
The ultimatum given by Washington to the Jamaican government surrounding the almost 50-year medical cooperation between Jamaica and Cuba. As Jamila Maitland explains, there is expected to be a wave of ripple effects following the discontinuation of the program.
Opposition spokesman on health, Dr. Alfred Dawes, said the decision to end the medical program between Jamaica and Cuba, that includes the deployment of hundreds of Cuban healthcare workers, will undoubtedly have a far-reaching impact in the public health sector.
Majority of Jamaicans benefit from this program, and persons are going to go blind. We just can't ramp up the number of surgeries that they're doing, and it is going to cause a serious deficit.
The Ministry of Health says there are close to 300 Cuban healthcare workers in Jamaica. They are each being offered individual contracts. But Dr. Dawes doesn't believe there will be a high take-up.
This concept of individual contracts is not going to fill the gap because the collaborators know that there are consequences to.
Okay, let me just stop there. This is where I have a problem with the Jamaican media. This is where I don't know if they're picking side with the People's National Party or I don't know what it is, but this is where I have a problem with the media. A journalist is standing there talking to the opposition spokesperson on health. The government, the health minister said, look, we are offering the Cuban doctors individual contract because of the fact that the 50-year agreement that Michael Manley signed in 1976 expired. And even before, the minister said, even before the Trump administration warned them about it, they realized that it violates international labor laws. That is what they said. So we cannot, as leaders with good intent, sign a similar contract. So we are trying to work out with the Cuban government. Let's fix this contract. The Cuban government refused. And they are trying to sign individual contract. This man now, Dr. Dawes, stood there in front of a journalist and said that the Cuban doctors are not going to take it up, the individual contract, because they know that there are consequences. That is what he said. The Cuban doctors and nurses are not going to take up the individual contracts because they know that there are consequences. I am not a journalist, not a trained journalist, but I've been watching, Al Jazeera, CNN, Fox, whatever, long enough, BBC, to know that the automatic follow-up for that is, what are the consequences? What are the consequences that the Cuban doctors or nurses are going to face if they don't go back to Cuba, if they decide to take up an individual contract? As a Jamaican doctor, a Jamaican nurse, a Jamaican pharmacist can go to America, can go to Dubai, can go to anywhere in the world and sign an individual contract, and they can go back home to Jamaica. Why is it that the Cuban medical profession cannot sign an individual contract and go back to Cuba? And let me tell you why. Because their family will be targeted, their family will end up in prison. That is why. And if the journalist asks that question, and Dr. Dawes would be honest and say that if they don't return, their family will end up in prison, then the next question is, do you support a government like that? Do you support a government that would lock up your family? And keep in mind, we're talking to a doctor. I believe Dr. Dawes worked in America and Mexico or somewhere, but I got information that he worked outside of Jamaica. And Dr. Dawes, would you be okay? Because we know that the Jamaican government gives out scholarship. Would you be okay if the Jamaican government gave you a full ride scholarship and you went to Mexico, you went to America and work, and the government took 70% or 80% of your paycheck and leave you with 30 or 20 to survive? Those are the questions that need to be asked. And people are not asking them. Why are the Cubans going to be afraid to go back home? Why don't they take the individual contracts? Why are Cuban doctors and nurses in Cuba living in shacks? Cuba is the only, let me share a story, because people think I'm just talking, because I have nothing else to do. When we went to Cuba, we went to this place called Guadalavaca, I think, Guadalavaca in Cuba. And one of the things that stood out to me, every community in Cuba, they have a community clinic. And we went there, and the doctor that was in charge of the community clinic, trust me, I couldn't believe, just imagine Gully Bop, the DJ Gully Bop, when Gully Bop did Mad Out and Maga Down and stuff like that. Just imagine, put that in your imagination. That was how the doctor looked. When you look, he was in this like one bedroom shack. And this is a doctor, a medical doctor. And as I said, as a Jamaican, I respect the Cuban people. The Cuban doctors, in my opinion, are the best doctors in the entire world. When I was in Cuba, never seen anything like that in my life before. I saw this man walking around without pupils. The black part of his eyes was gone. And that was because he was blind, and the medical procedure that they did in Cuba, they took it out and they fixed it, and he was able to walk around. Him look creepy. Almost look like when Alkaline did put something in his eye, same tattoo it. But he was able to see. And that is how good the Cuban doctors are. We complain, the opposition complain in Jamaica that the government is not paying the Cuban doctors and nurses. That is what the government complain about. The government, the opposition complain that the government is not paying the Jamaican doctors and nurses. And Jamaican, as I say, I have a lot of friends in the medical field, and every doctor I know drive a car, live in a decent house, whether they rent or whatever. Every Jamaican doctor I know drive a car, live in a decent house. Most of the nurses I know, same thing. But in Cuba, when you go to Cuba, a waitress in Cuba is in a better position than a doctor. When we went, we stayed at the hotel, all-inclusive hotel, and we talked with the staff and stuff like that. And I think one thing people need to realize too, you cannot go around and talk to people in Cuba in the street and ask them certain things. They're not going to answer because they could be arrested. That is the type of government that Jackson is supporting. So when you're in the hotel and you're talking to the staff, they'll talk to you like, one off they'll talk to you. And I remember, like, we used to leave like $5 tip on the bed every time we come out for breakfast and stuff like that. And when the housekeeper said to us that $5 is her month paycheck, I almost collapsed. That is what's happening in Cuba. And we don't want better for the Cuban people. This is the government that Jackson support, not the Cuban people. Yeah, so we stayed there for 6 days, and every time we put a $5 US on the bed, like I've never seen, because I work in hospitality. Working in Jamaica in hospitality, even 20 years ago, if you give me $5, I'm like, yeah, $5, okay. But when you give that woman $5, like, the smile on her face could not be bigger. That's how happy she was, because that is equivalent to a month paycheck. That is the type of government that Jackson trusts Jackson over the Jamaican government. And Dr. Dawes, as I said, as a medical doctor, should be ashamed of himself. If you don't want to give the prime minister or the governing party any credit for anything, shut your damn mouth and don't say anything. But you cannot come out and defend the Cuban doctor, the Cuban government, and at the same time saying that the Cuban doctors will not be able to go home because they are not going to be able to take up these individual contract because they're going to face penalty. You can't do that.
To abandoning their country.
I'm not going to speculate as to what the response will be from the
Majority of Jamaicans benefit from this program, and persons are going to go blind. We just can't ramp up the number of surgeries that they're doing, and it is going to cause a serious deficit.
The Ministry of Health says there are close to 300 Cuban healthcare workers in Jamaica. They are each being offered individual contracts. But Dr. Dawes doesn't believe there will be a high take-up.
This concept of individual contracts is not going to fill the gap because the collaborators know that there are consequences.
You know what? As a matter of fact, I think we should go on Dr. Dawes' Instagram and flood it and ask him what's the consequences and see if we'll get an answer from him. I think that is what we should do. What are the consequences? And do you still support a government that will do that to their people if they don't go home? Because the thing is, the Cuban people, the Cuban spirit is just like the Jamaican spirit. Like Jamaica, our remittance in Jamaica is over $4 billion, I think. And Cubans outside of Cuba love their country as much as how you see Cuba, the condition that Cuba is in. The Cuban people love their country just like how Jamaicans love their country. And every single money we get, we take out a 25% and remittance sent back to Jamaica to make sure our family okay. That is how the Cuban people are. And that is the frustration that I'm having because, yes, we love the Cuban people, and I can't emphasize that enough. But the government, Mr. Fitzjackson is going to say we support the Cuban government. And another thing, another experience that I had in Cuba also. When we went, it was another couple was there, and then there's another guy that traveled with us, but he was single. And when we went for breakfast one morning, the guy was telling us something, telling us what happened to him. So apparently, the housekeeper that cleaned his room, he did the same thing like us, but I think he left more. I think he left like $10 or something like that every day. And he said, we're talking about their experience, and he was saying, oh, the housekeeper is so happy for the $10 because, as I said, that is a month's paycheck. And I know the government give them food and stuff like that. You have to go pick up your food every month. So the $5 and the $10 is just pocket change. But the food that you go pick up, it depends on where you come from, which part of Cuba you live, the type of food that the government's going to give you. And some people have to skip 1 or 2 meals per day. That is how it works. So the guy, we were having a conversation, and the guy said the housekeeper was just so elated, so happy that he gave her the $10. And one day he got up, put the $10 on the bed, and he was coming out to go for breakfast. And the housekeeper came, and the housekeeper came with someone, which was our daughter. Her daughter was like 16 or 17 years old. And the housekeeper came to him, and he said this girl was beautiful, like a supermodel. And the housekeeper came to him and said, oh, my daughter, like I have a single daughter, like you can take her out and stuff like that. And that is what the people of Cuba have to go through. This woman was willing to give up her young daughter just for the opportunity, because this man is not Cuban. This man lives in Canada, and he can marry her and take her back to Canada. And that is how a lot of Cubans survive. People that are married to people in Russia, they're married to people in Germany, so they get to travel back and forth to Cuba. Don't we want better for the Cuban people? The same thing that we want for ourselves as Jamaican. We have the privilege of cussing out our government. We have the privilege of cussing out our opposition. Don't we want the same for the Cuban people? We are not going to be political prisoners if we go there and say Andrew Wall is a thief. We're not going to be political prisoners if we go there and say Mark Golding a thief. We can say whatever we want online and go our yard, and we are not going to be political prisoners. Don't we want that for the people of Cuba?
To abandoning their country.
I'm not going to speculate as to what the response will be from the Cubans who are here as to whether or not they'll take up this offer. But we have to be prepared. So there is a contingency plan that is being put in place, led by the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, to look at where they are, the critical services, and what the gaps that theoretically could be.
Explains what currently obtains.
The part salary goes to the Cuban government, part salary goes to the worker here.
The U.S. government has described it as forced labor or modern-day slavery. Dr. Alfred Dawes describes it as unfortunate.
So I'm very worried for the country. It's unfortunate that we are victims of great power rivalry, because that's exactly what it is. And it's unfortunate that we're trading the healthcare of our Jamaicans for diplomatic goodwill.
TV.
Yeah, so that's another media opportunity. So I don't understand these media people. How can you have this man standing there and saying these things without follow-up questions? Okay, so how can we trade the health care of our society for political goodwill? Did you ask that to the people of Venezuela, the Canadians that had to back down from whatever they were doing for Cuba? The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. St. Vincent and the Grenadines have a dialysis program that is 100% run by Cuban medical doctors. 100% run the St. Vincent and the Grenadines dialysis. And everybody has to back down. Right now, the Cuban government is in talks with the American government to try and make some deal. So the Cuban government is weak too. It's only the Jamaican government that is weak. Only the Jamaican government, out of all the governments across the world. Claudia Sheinbaum from Mexico. When Maduro was taken out of Venezuela, she stepped up and started providing more oil to Cuba, and she insisted that she was going to help she was not going to sit by and watch Cuba just crumble. And with one phone call, she had to stop. And you are going to say Jamaica, small, tiny Jamaica, is the one country in the world that should stand up to the American government, and everybody else, like Claudia Sheinbaum from Mexico, is not weak. The acting president of Venezuela is not weak. The Canadian Prime Minister is not weak. Everybody else that had to back down, all of the other Caribbean islands that had to step away because of the repercussion, they are not weak. But the Prime Minister, the Jamaican government, is weak and cowering to this administration. That is what and the thing that I would ask anyone from the opposition that is backing this, given if things were different and the People's National Party won the election on September 3rd, what would you have done different when the Americans come and say, look, the Cuban medical program is human trafficking. They are not paying their people. Explain the situation to you. Bring documentation and everything and say, do this or that. Because people are out there talking about visa, like visa is the issue. Visa was not the issue in the 1970s when Jamaica was sanctioned. Back in the 70s, when you go to shop and them used to married things. I know a lot of people, young people, don't even understand that terminology, but them used to call it married. They married the flour with a tin of mackerel. They married the sugar with some coffee. You cannot buy one thing because they're married. You have to buy them together. That is what, as a child, I remember growing up in Jamaica experiencing because of the sanction. And I'm not saying that America is right. I don't think that the 65-year sanction that the American government have on Cuba is right. I don't think it's right. And I believe that the Cuban people would be doing way better if there wasn't a sanction. But the question is, the superpower that America is, and for the past 2,000 years, we have had a superpower. We have had England as a superpower. We have had Spain. We have had a lot of superpower. And this is what superpower do. They crush small countries. So given the fact that we have that information, that is how we end up in the Caribbean as slaves, because of superpower. We always have a superpower. So given that information, America is the superpower now. We are tiny, tiny Jamaica, who 80% of our existence have to do with America. If America cut off our tourism, 80% of the people that travel to Jamaica come from America. Our banking system is America. Everything that we do is America. what would the People's National Party do if the Trump administration say, look, if you don't either sign a different deal with the Cuban government and give the doctors their individual contracts so they can stay and work, or you let them go back, what would you do? That is the question. And the thing is, why I believe that this is like a political sabotage is that, as I said, I've been talking about this for the entire week, and I got quite a few phone calls. And I remember Nationwide reported that there were some Caribbean islands that were able to reach a deal with the Cuban government. And Cliff Hughes was asking, why can't the Jamaican government reach a deal with the Cuban government? And what I was told with one of the islands, I'm not going to call a name, one of the islands that the agreement was reached. As we know, I've mentioned it on numerous times, the West Indies was split when after the Cuban nuclear crisis, and when Jamaica pulled away from the West Indies Federation. The 10 islands that formed the West Indies at the time were split. Half of them went with America, half of them went with Cuba. And not the country themselves, but the political parties within the country. So, for example, the Jamaica Labour Party, since 1962 have sided with the Americans. The People's National Party have sided with the Cubans. Trinidad and Tobago, the PNM government sided with the Cubans. The UNC government sided with the Americans. So every single thing that every good deed that has been done in Jamaica by Cuba has been done under the People's National Party leadership. The 18 years that that PJ Patterson was in office, the Cuban government, the Cuban light bulb situation in Jamaica, that was under the People's National Party. Schools that were built, the Jamaica People's National Party. This medical program that was signed off on, the People's National Party. Nothing has been done under the Jamaica Labour Party because the Cuban government and the People's National Party have a relationship. So what I was told is that the other island that was able to reach a deal, they have a leader, a prime minister that aligns with the Cuban government. So the Cuban government was willing to bend and come to an agreement. And one of the easiest agreement that I was told, as I said earlier on, the agency travel with the nurses in Jamaica. The money that the government of Jamaica pays, it goes to the agency. The agency send the Cuban government share to the Cuban government and give the Cuban nurses and doctors their share. What I was told, it was an easy fix if the Cuban government wanted them to stay. And the impression was given to me that if the People's National Party was in power, the Cuban government would have bent and signed an agreement, the same agreement that the prime minister, that the health minister has on the table now. That is what I was told, that if the People's National Party, the party that is in favor with the Cuban government, they would have signed it, because that is what happened in the other Caribbean island that was able to sign it off. And what would happen, as we heard the opposition spokesperson on health, Dr. Dawes said, the Cuban doctors will not take up the individual contract because they know that there are repercussions. So what I was told is that the easy solution would have been to sign the individual doctors, and the doctors would take it upon themselves and split the money and send it to the Cuban government, and that would be an easy fix, and all the doctors and nurses would be able to stay in Jamaica, and the Cuban government would still get some money. But because it's a Jamaica Labour Party government in office, the Cuban government was not going to bend and do that, because the Cuban government is a friend of the People's National Party, not Jamaica. And that is what people get twisted. Whenever we talk about our relationship with Cuba, we talk as if it's just a broad thing. And history will show you that our relationship with Cuba has always been, since Norman Manley, Michael Manley, it's always been that way. The People's National Party are the ones that have this great relationship with the Cuban government. So that is the thing. Like, is the Jamaican government, is the opposition People's National Party, are they siding with the Cuban government to gain political mileage out of this situation? Because they know healthcare is something serious, and Jamaica, it's very difficult for us to find, to keep our doctors and nurses in Jamaica, and to find people. I know that they're getting people now from the Philippines, they're getting people from Ghana to come to Jamaica to work. But I believe that the opposition know that this is going to cause a big problem and people are going to be upset. And when people are upset with the government, then the opposition can come in and be the savior. And to me, that is disgraceful, because if they really wanted, I honestly believe that the Cuban government could have allowed them to sign their individual contract, because the Cuban government is 100% sure that they are going to send money to the Cuban government. They are not going to run off. They are not going to run off. Doctors don't run off like that, because they know, ask Alfred Dawes, they know that there are consequences. So that is the point. And as I said, this thing is shameful, and I hope Jamaicans are intelligent enough to understand that. And even for those of us who are old enough to remember what happened in the 70s, in the 80s, and everything bad that happened to Jamaica in terms of the devaluation of our dollar. Because when we gained independence in 1962, the Jamaican dollar was strong. And everything that happened since Jamaica became violent in the 1980 election, because before, when you ask people about 1960s coming up, about violent election, people say no, there's no violent election until like 76 coming up to 80. That was when it started. And I did a video on that already, where the CIA was in Jamaica, and the CIA was alleged to have brought illegal firearms and to harm people in Jamaica for political warfare. So all of these things that happen, would the People's National Party go up against this Trump administration and and bring us back to 1976? So, I'm just going to leave it right there, but that is it. Yes, I just believe that this is shameful, what is happening in Jamaica, and I hope that some agreement can be reached with the Cuban government and the American government, because I stand with the Cuban people, but as someone that, as I said, have the opportunity I can cuss the prime minister if I want, I can cuss the opposition if I want, and I'm not going to be imprisoned. I want the people of Cuba to have the same opportunity. So I'm going to leave it right there. So thanks for watching, and have a good night, and we'll come back live again next Saturday or Sunday when we do our week in review, when we review the hottest topic of the week, which was the Cuban medical program. All right, thanks again, and have a good one.